Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to your Thursday edition of Pelicans Daily, brought to you by Fan Arch. I'm your host, David Grubb, editor in chief of thebirdrights.com. And the reactions continue to come in regarding the Pelicans and Joe Dumars. Tuesday was his formal announcement by the organization, and the reactions continue to come in from fans and from around the basketball world. Certainly, the reaction that I've seen has been mixed. There are still people who are very optimistic and excited, who say that this is a great hire. The experience and the character of Joe Dumars really standing out for them. There are people who are cautiously optimistic, that they want to be optimistic when it comes to their sports fandom, and they will give Joe Dumars the benefit of the doubt, though they are concerned about the way the Pelicans handled their business. And then the third camp of folks who believe this is a bad hire and that the Pelicans are continuing to perpetuate bad hire after bad hire and are running in place. I think that the optimism comes from the potential of Dumars to put together a new structure for this team and to set its identity. But the issue for me, and I think for a lot of people, is are the Pelicans kind of recreating the Pistons and just going through this cycle between these two organizations? And if you look, it's kind of weird over the last several years how many connections there have been between the Pelicans and the Pistons. Because if you go back and you look at the hiring of Stan Van Gundy, his job before he came to the Pelicans had been with the Pistons. You look at Trajan Langdon, who took over for Troy Weaver. So Langdon, the former general manager in New Orleans, goes to Detroit, becomes the general manager there. The coach that he has to fire is Monty Williams, who was the former coach of the Pelicans. The general manager he's taking over for is Troy Weaver, who's now moving in as the senior vice president of basketball operations for the Pelicans. And then you also have players that have moved back and forth between those teams several times over the last few years as well. There's been a lot of connections there, whether you talk about Jahlil Okafor or you talk about Frank Jackson. It's just there's just this connection between the Pistons and the Pelicans. Joe Dumars coming down from the Pistons to the Pelicans. Troy Weaver, formerly obviously with the Wizards, but before that with the Pelicans. It's just all these things that have connected these two franchises. Though I think if you look at the two right now, folks are most optimistic about the Pistons. That doesn't mean you can't create optimism around the Pelicans. That doesn't mean that this is a hopeless situation. It just means that the job, and I said this yesterday, the job is going to be very difficult. It's not going to be easy, but it's not impossible. This is sports, and we've seen teams, unlikely as it is, rebound very quickly with the right moves. They have to be the right moves, though. One wrong move, and this is all a very delicate house of cards, and it can topple pretty easily. But when you look at Troy Weaver and what's happening with the hiring of Troy Weaver, as the Pelicans haven't formally announced it yet, but it was announced by Mark Spears of Anscape and ESPN, their lead NBA writer there, that Weaver would be coming to join the Pelicans. This is two high-profile former Pistons, as we discussed, coming to the Pelicans in just a matter of days. And putting them together gives you two people who also had very different roles in shaping the way the Pistons are now. For Dumars in his time, he took over a team building towards a championship run that was built primarily with veterans, guys who had gotten their starts in other places. All of them came from other places to Detroit. Whether you talk about Chauncey Billups, who was on his third team at the time, talk about Ben Wallace, who had been on multiple teams, had played with the Wizards, had played with the Magic, had been in other places, and finally moves on to Detroit. Rasheed Wallace had been with a couple of teams. Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince was the only homegrown guy in that group. So you had a very veteran team that came from other places that you were able to assemble. You did that with veteran coaches in Rick Carlisle and Larry Brown in particular. And then Flip Saunders, who took over after him. So all experienced NBA head coaches who had taken teams on deep playoff runs. That was the hallmark of the Dumars tenure in Detroit. But then also on the back end, it was overpaying some veterans and taking bets on guys and considering them franchise players like a Josh Smith who never evolved into that, overpaying those types of players, not drafting well, and then not really adapting to efficient offense that had quality 3-point shooting on the perimeter. Dumars struggled with drafting players and maintaining success. The Pistons got very bad very quickly. Went from deep playoff runs to missing the playoffs entirely, and just not and shuttling through coaches. Weaver was given a team. He did not get to pick his coach when he first arrived in Detroit. He was given Dwayne Casey. Casey had been an experienced head coach as well. Certainly had jobs in Atlanta, had a success in Toronto. So a guy who had previous stints as well, a very experienced coach, but he did not pick Dwayne Casey. Came in, took over a team that had an aging and declining Blake Griffin at that point. So he kind of leaned into a rebuild there, drafting very athletic players, young players, trying to reset the culture. But most notably, the Pistons were really bad while he was the GM. They only won 74 games over those 4 seasons, never won more than 23 games, had one of the worst seasons in NBA history last year with 14 wins. And the only coach he hired was Monty Williams, gave Monty Williams the biggest contract in NBA history at the time, which reset the market completely for head coaching hires. And then he and Williams both lose their jobs after 1 year, providing that really disastrous season. So you have to question his decision making when it comes to that. Didn't hire the coach he inherited, who had come in with his previous season with a 41-41 record, eighth in the Eastern Conference, a surprise eighth finish that season. Then guts that team. They bottom out, don't do particularly well, and then you're drafting is a mixed bag um, overall. Some of those players, certainly like a Cade Cunningham, who you drafted number one overall, has turned into an all-star, doing very well. Jalen Duren, a solid role player. Isaiah Stewart, a solid role player and defender for a Pistons team that is one of the best defensively in the NBA. Jaden Ivey seemed like he was starting to come around this season before he got hurt. The Pistons certainly miss him in the playoffs. But you also have a guy like Killian Hayes, who you drafted and couldn't develop and didn't get better. The reclamation projects that he tried in bringing some young veterans back and trying to make them and resurrect their careers, most of those failed. So he set the foundation for a Pistons team that this year could get out of the first round of playoffs and upset the New York Knicks potentially. Yes, he built the framework for that, but it took Trajan Langdon and it took bringing in a new coach in JB Bickerstaff to turn the Pistons around and turn them into a winning team. So they made no playoff appearances. They never won more than 23 games. That's hard to find a track record of success. So what does this mean for the Pelicans by bringing him in? Certainly, the decision means that Joe Dumars wants to have somebody that he trusts alongside of him. He didn't hire anybody else in that front office that he inherits as far as Bryson Graham and Swin Cash. He didn't hire this coaching staff. He has yet to decide who's coming back there or make any public statements regarding their futures. So you want to have somebody you trust and bring him in. The question is, are you bringing in somebody? Is this an innovative step? Are you bringing in somebody who has shown that they're interested in acquiring young talent, that they have a kind of a player profile that they're looking for, physical defenders on the front court and on the perimeter? Not a lot of shot making, but guys who can drive and attack the basket. Cade Cunningham, an improving outside shooter. Jaden Ivey, an improving outside shooter. But you would say those guys are more slashers than they are and scorers than they are shooters, using their physicality, their speed, and their athleticism to get around the basket. Jalen Duren, a guy who can give you a double double, undersized at the center position, but a very talented power forward. Is this an innovative decision then? Or is this recycling guys who have failed in leadership positions in their most recent leadership positions? That's what we're going to find out because, again, Dumar's been out of the loop as far as being the final decision maker in it for a decade. And then Troy Weaver, a guy who at one time was one of the hot young names in executive leadership in the NBA, but did not do a good job with the Detroit Pistons, though he had very high draft picks and money to spend. It just didn't work for him there. So I think that what you are going to see, and I think one of the big questions is, what does this mean for Bryson Graham in particular? Because Bryson has been largely credited with the success the Pelicans have had in the draft lately. So does this mean that you are enhancing and you feel much better about the talent acquisition for this team and the evaluation of young players? Does this mean you're getting a stronger focus for the G League and that team and seeing what the Birmingham squadron can do as far as player development? Are you leaning into finding players and really developing them? Because we haven't seen a lot of we've seen the two-way guys, and occasionally they go down, but they've been with the Pelicans primarily out of necessity. So, in the short relationship that the Pelicans have had with Birmingham, primarily it's been used to send guys who were drafted in the first round down to get some starts, like Jordan Hawkins and like Trey Murphy, or it's been to fill holes during injury. What we haven't seen is a long term plan to take a young player and really develop them primarily by starting them in the G League and getting them to the NBA team as a fully formed product. Certainly, injuries are not something that you can factor into that equation when you're forced to bring guys up a little bit maybe earlier than you'd like. Like as we talked about with a Keon Brooks, who probably could be served by some more time in the G League, where if he's on the NBA roster, he's a guy who's likely to just sit at the end of the bench as your 12th man on a fully healthy team. He's a guy who needs reps because if you're going to bring him in and ask him to shoot, he got starts at the end of the season, but him sitting on the bench doesn't help his development because you're counting on him as a wing in today's NBA to move without the basketball, to know when to put the ball on the floor and attack the basket, to be able to defend multiple positions, to get those reps, understanding when to switch, how to close out on the perimeter. If you're sitting on the bench, as good as it is getting those NBA paychecks, you're not getting better. And there is no development during the regular season. It's only by reps that you're going to get better because practice is not where you get better. Practice is lighter than it's ever been in the NBA. Practice are really glorified shoot arounds uh, for the large part. So it's on the player in the offseason to get better. But if during the season, if you want to get an opportunity to play minutes and you're a young player, if you're not in the 8 to 9 man rotation on a nightly basis, you might be best suited by being in the G League. So are the Pelicans going to shift their mindset to much more player development? And I think that's something that fans have wanted, knowing the limitations of small market franchises. You have to have a deeper pool of talent to select from because you're not getting that in free agency and you're not getting that outside of if you don't hit on those draft picks. So you've got to be judicious with your draft picks, but you've got to be concentrated on player development. Maybe that's what having Weaver and Bryson Graham together will do. Also, it strengthens Joe Dumars' position with the other side of the front office, with the people like Greg Bensel, with like Mickey Loomis. He's got his guy now. He's got someone to echo his positions to them in meetings, somebody who understands his way of thinking, and somebody who's also been in the position that he's been in, having sat in that first chair for an NBA franchise. I think what you also want to look at is the observance and how aggressive this duo is in managing the cap. They both have some spotty decisions when it comes to player contracts. The Pelicans expect to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $21 million of cap space when they go into the offseason. They do have some major contracts, but very few that are going to be appealing to other teams in the offseason. CJ McCollum's contract, appealing because it's expiring and it's well over $30 million. That's a way to offload maybe some bad deals for another team. But beyond that, the limitations that injury places on this roster and the lack of real big contracts. You're talking about DeJounte Murray's contract, which because of his injury status is very unattractive right now, and then Kelly Olynyk. Those are your two remaining big contracts of players that you think could get moved, potentially be moved this offseason if Zion Williamson is not being moved. Trey Murphy's not going anywhere. Herb Jones's contract is not particularly prohibitive or attractive as far as like, Herb Jones may be attractive to someone, but I don't think the Pelicans are interested in giving him up. And I would say his position with the Pelicans is even more secured under a person like Joe Dumars. You would think that Joe Dumars, when you're talking about the characteristics that he's looking for, professionalism, smart decision making, commitment to winning, that's Herb Jones, and that's why Herb Jones is so beloved by executives and fans alike. And he's under a very reasonable contract because of his status as a second rounder and the decision that David Griffin made to sign him to a deal relatively early in his career. Now, the Pelicans are being aggressive. I want to see if they continue to add people to the staff and in what capacity they are. But you've already got a restructuring of the organizational chart on Airline Highway, so we'll see. So we'll see what the next move is. Um, Now, one of the things that we have to think about for the future as well for the Pelicans is what is their offseason agenda? What are they looking to do? And I think this offseason is extremely complicated for the Pelicans, but they need to be very aggressive in trying to make a deal to get better. They can't be idle and content with simply saying, if we're healthy, we're going to be a better team. There's still roster fits that need to be addressed and their skill sets that need to be addressed. This is a team that lacks playmaking, shot making to a degree, toughness, interior defense, and experience at the point guard position. You're going to go into the season without those things. So how do you potentially resume that? And there are a number of ways. Certainly in the draft, you can address that. And in the top five, the players there. I think that if the player with the most compatible skill set for the Pelicans is Dylan Harper. Um, we'll get more to him as scouting reports start to come back and he's evaluated at some of the pre-draft functions. We'll get deeper into that, and we'll contact some of the folks with Rutgers and things like that and try to get more details about Dylan Harper as we get into the summer, and the rest of these top picks. But I think Dylan Harper is the best fit skill wise to what the Pelicans want to do. Defensively, he's able to guard multiple positions. I think he will improve as a shot maker. Again, only 1 year of college basketball, but made some shots. The shots will be easier for him if he's playing with Zion Williamson, certainly to get that gravity and get some open looks. I think that's the first step for him is always going to be, can you make catch and shoot 3-pointers? And that's what you want to see for players who are playing off of Zion Williamson. The other part is he can be a primary ball handler and a facilitator. And at his size, he can play multiple positions. So you can have him on ball and you can play him off ball and still feel comfortable that he can make a contribution, both as a scorer and a distributor. I like him. But there are other guys who bring skill sets to the table. If you want shooting and slashing, then you've got a guy like a VJ Edgecombe or a guy like Trey Johnson. Both of them bring you that. Connor Knuppel from Duke, multi-talented, able to run your offense. There are a number of players, I think, who the Pelicans could get in the top eight who could be immediate contributors for this team. That being said, what are the other things that they can do to be aggressive this offseason outside of the draft? Because that's the most unknown part at this stage. I will say again, the two players I think that I'm most leery of are Edgecombe and Ace Bailey. Ace Bailey will probably measure out between 6'9" and 6'10", but can maybe get taller than that. But he doesn't have the shooting numbers of a guy like a Michael Porter Jr. did, or the shooting profile of that guy. They compared him to Kevin Durant, but I didn't see the kind of efficiency out of Kevin Durant that you saw after Kevin Durant. I mean, Kevin Durant put one of the all-time freshman seasons on the map, so I don't think it's fair to Ace Bailey to be comparing him to Kevin Durant. He didn't have a winning impact at Rutgers, and I think that's always a concern in this era of where young players are able to come into college and impact winning very quickly. For Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper together to not be able to impact winning at Rutgers is a concern. My concern for Bailey is there are a number of nights where he didn't get rebounds, etc. Didn't play great defense. I don't think he's a guy who you can put the ball in his hands and let him create on a regular basis. He's not Paul George with the basketball. Um, I think that he's a good basketball player, but I think he's going to need to have a very structured and organized team that can allow him to fail. And I don't know if the Pelicans have that kind of opportunity to build that young man's total skill set up while getting a good enough contribution from him. But he could end up with the New Orleans Pelicans. That's not unlikely. We'll see. But in free agency, the Pelicans, like I said, will have somewhere around 21, maybe $22 million, according to the numbers from Spotrac. They can get a good couple of pieces with that money. They also have the $14.1 million non-taxpayer mid-level exception to their credit that they can utilize. What do the Pelicans need? They need 3-and-D players, experienced players, an upgrade from guys like Brandon Boston and Keon Brooks, who are still very young. You want some veterans in the mix that you know what you're getting from them on a night-to-night basis if you want to win basketball games. Again, I am putting that caveat on. If the focus is winning immediately, you need to upgrade on the wing positions. If you're planning on rebuilding, then yes, start leaning into a rebuild and younger players and allowing them to lose um, without tanking. I am not a fan of tanking. I don't believe tanking works. Somebody point to me where losing on purpose, if as a continued mindset, gets an organization going forward. The Pistons were not trying to be as bad as they were for 4 years. They were just really bad because of bad decisions. But some organizations, like the Wizards, who have never won 50 games in their franchise's history, like the Sixers, who have been unable to get past the second round in the postseason since they started tanking prior to even getting Joel Embiid, and have burned through the careers of two players like Ben Simmons and Markel Fultz, who are now on the one is on the fringes of the NBA and the other's out of it. Tanking doesn't work. We haven't seen it work for the Jazz. If they get Cooper Flag and everything turns around, okay, maybe. But the Jazz, even when they were rebuilding primarily in their past, they were they were good teams. They drafted well and were able to secure enough free agents to stay competitive. They didn't get good by tanking. And Danny Ainge, who has led the tank effort in Utah, his tanking in Boston didn't work, did it? Because when the Celtics won their championship, it wasn't because they tanked. It was because they went out and got veterans to go with some young players that they had. Remember, they gave up on Al Jefferson. They gave up on those guys to get Kevin Garnett, to get Ray Allen. They gave up on their youth outside of Rajon Rondo and Kendrick Perkins. So when you think about tanking, I don't want to see the Pelicans tank. If you want to rebuild, have an understanding of the type of player you want to get and draft well. Remember, the Oklahoma City Thunder rebuilt their team, made a trade for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, and then have only had one top three pick, that being Chet Holmgren. So when they got their number one top three pick, they hit it out of the park, and the rest of their picks being in those mid areas, they've done a great job in drafting players in the middle to later parts of the first round and into the second round as well. So we're still assuming that Zion Williamson is on the roster until we are told otherwise. Guys like Torian Prince, guys like Jake LaRavia, guys like Matisse Tybalt, guys like Alec Burks, guys like that could be good additions to this team. Veterans who you know can come and contribute, play defense, and or knock down shots. Torian Prince, the guy that fits that mold of a rugged defender, can play the three, play maybe some small ball four occasionally, but knocks down threes at a solid rate. Laravia, a guy who played for the Memphis Grizzlies, and Pelicans fans saw him with the Grizzlies and then moved on to the Kings when they made their deals. Laravia is a guy who shot 40% from three as well. Matisse Tybalt, a guy who you've seen with the Portland Trailblazers and has played well against the Pelicans this season. Alec Burks, Came at the end of the season, knocks down shots, has been doing this for multiple stops, whether it's been in Detroit, whether it's been in New York, wherever Alec Burks, Utah. Alec Burks knocks down shots. The Pelicans could get a veteran shot maker, particularly if you move off of CJ McCollum and you're looking for more shooting off of the bench and you're kind of upgrading your bench and allowing guys to pull into their roles. Let's say you move off of CJ McCollum, get some help in the front court. Well, in the backcourt, this is where you get a guy, or on the wing positions, you get a Burks or a Tybal to fill in that role, and you try to groom Brandon Boston to be your sixth man in that and take over the scoring load off the bench, and just allow him to focus on being a scorer and occasional defensive matchup with somebody because of his versatility. This is how you start planning for the roster that you have. The other free agents that, though, if you're going to spend the money and really go for it, it may feel like it's a bit late, but there's still plenty of meat on the bone if you're going for a guy like Miles Turner. I was not a fan of Turner when he was getting overpaid, but his contracts now are look a lot better relative to players at his position and with his relative skill set. The things that Turner brings, he's going to be the best center in in the market off season. He's going to want to continue to get a solid role, and Turner can play both in the half court and in up tempo situations. We know the Pacers are a team that likes to run, in that he can be a trail in transition who can knock down the 3-point shot. He also has the athleticism to finish above the rim and be a good pick and roll partner. He blocks shots. At times, he's been the leading shot blocker in the NBA. He's been a top 5 shot block guy throughout his career. As far as just putting up those numbers and creating some level of rim intimidation, he brings more physicality to the position than either Yves Missi or Carlo Makovic is able to do. And you also, if you were able to sign Miles Turner, I would say you're a lot more flexible in moving on from Kelly Olynyk, because I can play Miles Turner. If I want to play double big, I can play Miles Turner and Yves Missi together. I can play Miles Turner and Carlo Makovic together at times. Though Makovic, again, we want to see him improve defensively. I can do those things, and I can get rid of Kelly Olynyk and maybe find a more physical front court player to even offset the undersized physically Yves Missi and the more perimeter oriented Miles Turner. You might find a guy who's just a rebounder, who doesn't need those touches that a Turner might need. But when you are playing against a team that has size and physicality up front, and you need to match that, then you might be able to find that kind of player. Ironically enough, Detroit has plenty of those. The other guy, and I think that this has gone to the place where I think the relationship can be mended, and you have the right executive to make this happen in Joe Dumars, and I think in Troy Weaver as well. And if I'm not mistaken, and I might be, but I believe Troy Weaver was in Oklahoma City when Chris Paul was there. So I think it's time for a reunion uh, for Chris Paul and the New Orleans Pelicans. Chris Paul never played in the Pelicans uniform. Obviously, he was with the New Orleans Hornets prior to the name change. But Chris Paul just played all 82 games for the San Antonio Spurs. They've got their point guard now, De'Aaron Fox. The Pelicans are without theirs until January, probably, with DeJounte Murray. To bring Chris Paul back, if you want to get some, look, you know the two things that Chris Paul is going to do. He's going to show up, okay, during the regular season. He's going to play games and compete for you. And then he's going to raise your floor. No matter where you are and no matter where he's been throughout his career, Chris Paul has made teams that weren't expected to make the playoffs into playoff contenders. He made teams that are playoff contenders into winning franchises, real winning franchises. And he makes winning franchises as teams that could compete for deep playoff runs. He could do that for the New Orleans Pelicans on a reasonable cost. The money is there to go out and bring him back, give him the farewell tour that he deserves. Because if he does come back, this could be his final season. And I don't think San Antonio was the place for Chris Paul to say his NBA goodbye. I think to bring him back to New Orleans, a city that he did not initially want to leave. And I don't think his problem has ever been with the city of New Orleans. It was always with George Shinn and then the NBA. But to bring back Chris Paul this way could exercise some of those proverbial demons for this franchise as well, because the way they handled Tyson Chandler, David West, and Chris Paul in particular, that trio, the most successful team still in this franchise's 23-year history. Maybe it does. Maybe it's a time to bring David West back into the fold as well. Not as maybe not in a major capacity, but there's a role to kind of heal some of these old wounds that the franchise has had, and some of these players have had. There's no New Orleans basketball alumni. You don't see the old players sitting courtside ever. And yes, this is a young franchise, but where are the guys? Where are the players who did play here who have retired? You ever seen Mo Peterson come back? You ever seen Peja visit? And yeah, a lot of these guys weren't here very long, but we've seen plenty of other franchises where players are made to feel at home. And maybe that's something that Joe Dumars can do too when you talk about building a culture and embracing some of the history. And I would say that that's been a problem for the Bensons in general, and it is whether it's the Saints or the Pelicans, has been embracing the history of the organization that preceded them, or even some of the further history that they were involved in. There's been some trouble in embracing that, and I think it's time that they do that. And this is a way to do that, starting by going out and signing Chris Paul and really build this thing up. I think he would help um, a really good deal. And if you're talking about teaching players professionalism, if you're talking about making an offense work, yeah, Chris is going to slow things down. Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to play at a slower pace, but you can run in transition. He's going to milk that clock, but you're going to get good shots. And if you're playing at a talent deficit, which the Pelicans could be at some nights, then Chris Paul mitigates that by making sure your team does execute in the half court. He could be a godsend for this team. He really could. Um, Now, if you're looking to make any trades around the league, I think that you're more concerned about players you're getting rid of. I think you need to trade Jordan Hawkins and move on from him. Again, I think you can upgrade from guys like Kelly Olynyk. I certainly think in free agency you don't want to retain some of your guys. The two guys that are your free agents, Bruce Brown and Jeremiah Robinson Earl. Neither one of those needs to return. Nothing against JRE. We'll talk about him, of course, as we go through the grading, and we're going to grade Bruce Brown in a moment. But I think that's the agenda there. Um, you know, if the Pelicans may be targeting any guards or anything in free agency, I don't know who those could be. I don't know if there are any veteran guards that you want to go after that aren't embracing someone else's problem at this stage. I think you want to give some of your guys the opportunity to continue to breathe. I don't think you want to go out and have a big name player on the wing per se to compete with Trey Murphy just as he's coming into his own. You need to reinforce to him that you believe that he's an all-star player or an ascending player. Because if you don't think that, that's fine too. Again, whatever your assessment is. But if you're assessing that you're going forward and you want to keep Trey Murphy, the best thing for his development is not to crowd it by putting another player who's going to be a high volume or high usage scorer around him. I think what you want to do is continue to develop those two things: ball handling, and which you would address with Chris Paul, and going after and making him the kind of qualifying, the kind of offer that gets him off of the market quickly. I think that's a deal you go ahead and make as soon as you can. You make him that offer and say, Chris, we want you. You make him turn you down and say, I need either. If he needs time, then you say, look, we're your first call though. You call us. We want to sign you. You tell us what that number is, and you give yourself the opportunity to say no to that number. But you make Chris Paul say no to you first. Because I don't think, again, if you go out and you try to pursue a veteran guard who can score on the basketball, unless you're moving off of CJ McCollum, unless you're deciding to get rid of some of these guys, I wouldn't do that. You have enough of those guys on the roster who are going to take shots, and you're going to be bringing in a rookie who's going to need shots as well. So I think that you want to be careful in that. You want to address those two positions, get that ball handling by getting Chris Paul, and then I think if you can convince Miles Turner to come to New Orleans, then you try to do that. You go ahead and make that move. We'll see what the Pelicans do. All right, we're going to move to our next segment on as far as um, grading of players. And I think that, uh, Bruce Brown was our next candidate as far as how we wanted to look at their season. And, when I look at Bruce Brown last season, in the short time and the short number of games that he played with the Pelicans, 8 points, 4 rebounds, shot 36% from three. You see the numbers there on your screen. But the big number for me, the only thing that I thought when he was brought over in that trade was that he was an expiring contract. $21 million coming off the books. Goodbye. And I say that to this day. I don't even want to evaluate his season. If you're asking me for a letter grade, I give you, a C. He was a disposable player. In no way is he memorable. He didn't have any memorable nights. He had a couple. His out would be more memorable for wearing cowboy hats and shirts with no sleeves. That's what you're gonna remember about Bruce Brown. You're not gonna remember any game that he played. You're not gonna, he got into a couple of scuffles, that didn't mean anything. Picked up a technical foul. I don't. I, I'm not thinking about Bruce Brown when I think about the story of this past season. The only thing memorable about him is cowboy hat and shirts with no sleeves. That's it. As far as I'm concerned, he's a C player. He could help a team that's on the verge of a championship like he did with the Denver Nuggets and be a versatile performer for them. But for the New Orleans Pelicans, he gives you nothing at that price. For $21 million. No. Interesting enough, who drafted him? Who drafted him? I believe it was Troy Weaver, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, not Troy Weaver. I believe it was Joe Dumars. I know he was drafted by the Pistons. I want to say Bruce Brown was drafted by. I know he was drafted by the Pistons. I know that for sure. I'm trying to see, but I want to say he was. I know he was drafted by the Pistons. Now I'm forced to look this up and see. Okay, so he was drafted by neither of them. So he was drafted by the Pistons. But again, another Pistons connection. Let's move on. Let's move on. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to discuss as far as Bruce Brown goes. That's the Pelicans need to just let him walk in free agency. If he can go on and have the rest of his career wherever he wants to and make that decision, but there's no reason. There's no reason. I don't know if I'm clear, but let me make sure there's no reason for the New Orleans Pelicans to bring Bruce Brown back next season. None. None whatsoever. None. Like somebody somewhere, I'm sure is hearing the David Griffin say he could guard positions 1 through 5 at 6'4". No, 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 no. Okay. Thank you all again for spending your time watching Pelicans Daily. I appreciate it. I really do. The growth over the last couple of weeks has been really, really impressive, and I am thankful and grateful for you guys tuning in and paying attention to what I have to say. Again, if you want me to talk about something, if you got a comment, leave it below. If you got a question, leave it below. I will accept fair criticism, but don't come at me with craziness. But please let me know. This is I try to be as objective as I can each and every day and give you the information as I get it and as I interpret it. I try to give you that with facts and supporting information to back up whatever position I have, and I try to be fair to all the parties involved. So I thank y'all again, and I appreciate you. Make sure you check on social media. I'm on Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find me in all those places. And don't forget to check thebirdrights.com as well for Pelican stories and information each and every day. Until tomorrow, y'all have a great one, and let's go Pels.